The Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, is under pressure to give public sector workers bigger pay rises in England than she had budgeted for. The BBC has been told that independent pay review bodies covering teachers and most NHS staff are recommending increases of more than the 2.8% rise the government had been planning. Downing Street has said that there will be no additional funding from the Treasury if recommended pay awards exceed what departments can afford. Our political correspondent Ian Watson reports.
Independent pay review bodies recommend a level of increase which they believe is necessary to retain and recruit staff. Last year, the government accepted their recommendations in full. This year, ministers have a dilemma. The Chancellor has budgeted for a 2.8% increase, but the recommended pay increases are higher than this. So, the Chancellor would have to either ignore the pay review body's advice, or more likely, say that any increase above 2.8% would have to be met from within existing departmental budgets. In other words, by cuts or efficiency savings. Teaching unions have already said that unless the Treasury fully funds the pay increases, they'll consider taking action. And unions are unlikely to regard the 3% recommendation for most NHS staff as adequate, raising the prospect of strikes and disruption in England's health service.
Now, there's a threat of strikes in the latest discussions on pay settlements with unions. The Teachers' Pay Review Body in England has recommended that teachers should be given a pay rise of about 4% this year. The NHS Pay Review Body has recommended 3%. Both are a challenge for the government because they are so much higher than the 2.8% that ministers have budgeted on for pay. Prime Minister's spokesman said this lunchtime that there would be no extra funding for pay rises if the recommendations exceed what departments can afford. Well, Daniel Kebede is the General Secretary of the National Education Union. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Can we start with what we now understand to be the pay recommended by the pay review body for teachers of, 4%? How do you feel about that?
Well, we still haven't seen the pay review body report. It is a leak to the Times. So we would first like to see it published in the public domain rather than leaks to the press. But of course, 4% is something that we would ask our members to consider. But we have to bear in mind what teachers need and education professionals need is an above inflation pay award that takes steps to address the crisis in recruitment and retention, but most crucially is fully funded to ensure that there are no cuts to education provision.
Well, let's turn to that, because the suggestion seems to be that if this is accepted, that this will the expectation will be that any extra above what the government had already budgeted will come out of the department's budget. What would be wrong with that?
Well, we have to bear in mind that education has endured 14 years of conservative austerity previously. Quite simply, at the moment, if you talk to any head teacher, any teacher, where efficiencies can be made, quite simply, they would say none, not without cutting staff or resource or both. And of course, this government wants to see high and rising standards, and we absolutely support that. But we need to see the investment in education, including the workforce, to achieve it.
And if there is no extra money to cover this pay rise from central government, will you be recommending a strike among teachers?
So I was a teacher in 2023, taking days of strike action during that period. It wasn't something that I wanted to do. Strike action is something that no teacher wants to engage in. I would really press this government and advise them to invest in education and its workforce. This would be the first Labour government since 1979 to encourage education to make cuts, and that isn't a direction of travel that anyone wants to see.
But the question, though, was if the government requires the extra to be paid out of the department, would you be recommending strikes?
We're a trade union and a democratic organisation. The next steps following the pay review body report being published will be determined by our executive and our membership, not by me as General Secretary. We absolutely want to avoid strike action. This government can avoid it by publishing the report promptly and ensuring that pay awards are funded properly.
And you are General Secretary, though, if they're not fully funded?
if they're not fully funded, then schools will have to make cuts, which no parent, no teacher wants to see.
Daniel Kebede, thank you very much.